On this episode of the John 1911 podcast, newsletter issues, 50 BMG targets, trading in an F40, and the 6.5 Creedmoor is a military cartridge now. Okay, good morning everybody. Today is Tuesday, September 2nd at about 20 after 7 in the morning Eastern Standard Time, and this is episode 381 of the John 1911 podcast. I'm going to be doing a solo podcast here. I'm trying to get it done before I have to run around and do a bunch of stuff for the range today. So I guess we'll start off with a couple of what we would call like inside or administrative issues that I'm trying to address. So we haven't gotten any complaints on it, but some of you have probably noticed that we've had some repetitive newsletters going out on the Tuesdays and Sundays, 7 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And that's part of the reason why I'm here doing a podcast now, because I was working on the newsletter issues from about 1:30 in the morning until about 6:45 this morning, last night into this morning. So newsletter just went out and everybody got a single video on the Bernardelli decocker video, which I realize if you don't know what I'm talking about sounds even more bizarre. So apologize. This is office and work safe, but if you were inconvenienced or you felt like you were getting a newsletter with the same story, I apologize for that. And if you'd gone to the website, but why would you? Because you would have thought that there's nothing new there. You'll find you even missed a couple of the articles. So I've been working with the mail server people to kind of get that all straightened out. So that's part of the reason why I'm in the office right now before everybody comes in. So let's see here. What is that? So we have some, I had intimated this on a previous I think podcast, and I talked about it, a little bit online, but we have multiple groups that are now interested in shooting steel or super high speed stuff at the John 1911 range. So traditionally, the only people that have ever come out there and shot 50s are one particular police department or police organization would come out and shoot their 50s as a qualification. Incidentally, I'm not so certain they're going to be coming back out too much anymore. I think they have a government facility they're going to be able to be using now. That was part of the reason why we did it, because none of the ranges that were in the area were really either willing or capable of eating a 50 BMG round. So, we always did it for them gratis. So, but as odd as it sounds, I've got 3 separate entities, I'll refer to it here, that want to shoot this kind of stuff. One of them, including Kraken. So Kraken's coming back out to the John 1911 range, and he has that Armalite AR-50 gun that he zeroed and we messed with at the range. And so we shot a little piece of steel, like a sacrificial piece of steel, but he and some other people had requested that they wanted to be able to shoot regular steel. So I was like, well, I guess I'll have to get some 50 BMG steel. And looked around and got some prices, got some from some of the cops, and like the prices on that stuff was just nuts. Well, I mean, I hate to say this, like if you're not like a big fan of old Jeff Bezos, you can buy 50 BMG rated steel off of Amazon. And I was like, well, okay. I mean, they can get it here. And it turns out, I mean, I didn't pay that much attention to it. It just was, I think it was BC Zone steel. And it is, they said they could get it to our range by, I don't know, like it was sometime this week here, and it arrived, it showed up at the office on Saturday. So it actually showed up in August. So, I haven't put any pictures up or anything like that, but probably today I've got to get some chains and implement some stuff. And so it's just 2 pieces of steel, and we will get that squared away. I'm going to set it up at the 500, 600 yard impact zone. I'm going to set up another one at what I would call the check target. So we have a large hill that, if you miss by a lot, you're still into that hill. So I make people, before they shoot at the 500, 600, I make them prove to me that they can, they're within like a foot of a target at least, um, on the check target, which is the side of the hill. So I'm going to put a 50 BMG rated check target there. And then I've got a piece of sacrificial steel that I'm going to put, I don't know, probably where Kraken and I put it before. So, I mean, the only other person that knows where that is Kraken. So it doesn't really concern you that much. You don't care. But we're going to be getting that set up this week. And I'm trying to source some shooting benches. And so I have you guys have all seen these shooting benches where people build them. It's a known template format. They're typically ambidextrous. There's a left hand seat and a right hand seat as a bench and all that. And I built one and it was fine, but for the time that it took me to do that, the juice wasn't worth the squeeze at all. It just was like, fuck that. So Kraken in particular, and I know one other person's going to request it too. One of the three people, or three entities, and one of the entities is a person. They're going to request a shooting bench. They're not going to be able to shoot prone, so we're going to put a bench down at the 100, and I'm going to the 100-yard shooting position, and then I'm going to put a bench at the 600-yard, and I can find them online, and there's dudes out there that are even building these things. I think roughly you see them between $200 and $300, probably $250 to $300, and maybe a little bit. I don't think I've ever seen one at $400, but they're roughly $300. And considering the amount of time that I put assembling the other bench, which I built in the cold under that shelter on our range, my time, it's so much more worth it to just spend $300. So we're going to get two of them. But what they're doing now, which I thought was really interesting, is you get them in treated wood. That's the first thing you do because they sit out and they're going to rot. But the second thing is these dudes now, they're putting Trex or their synthetic decking material on top of the bench. And I was really kind of turned on by that. I was like, man, that's got some real possibilities. Because one of the reasons why I haven't bought or built other benches is because the bench that I built currently sits under that picnic shelter on the rifle range. So it's kind of protected from the elements somewhat. But, at the 500, 600, and at the 100, those sit out in direct God's weather all day, all night. So regular old wood's just going to fall apart. So, and animals and bugs and all that, but Trex on the top, I thought that was interesting enough to be like, ooh, I'm going to try that. I think I'm going to get some of that. So, and I don't want to be cutting Trex. I don't want to breathe all that shit in. So, we'll be making calls and running around probably a tri-state area this week, picking up benches and trying to hang 50 BMG steel. Well, let me, I'll post it on the website. This 50 BMG steel, it's like, well, is this really worth it? I mean, I didn't even vet this listing that was on Amazon for the 50 BMG steel. I just was like, whatever, 50 BMG, it's a BC zone steel, and they could get it here. So I was, well, that stuff showed up, and it's about as thick as my thumb, horizontally. And I mean, again, you don't know what the hardness is and all that, but you look at the paperwork of where this came from, and it came from a company, oddly enough, it's in Indiana, so it's not crazy far. So I didn't pay crazy shipping, which is one of the nice things with Amazon. But it looks like it's a fairly, at least moderately serious steel machine manufacturing facility. So they have whatever their business is called, but they've created like a DBA, and they're kicking steel targets out the back door, which is probably just a side hustle for them. So we'll definitely be watching this steel, and I could theoretically buy some more 50 steel, but I mean, how close do you want? I mean, I don't know if I want to be putting 50 BMG steel at 100 and 200 yards. That stuff can really come back at you. So, haven't quite figured it out. We're kind of figuring out now. You can tell I'm working out in my mind as I talk to you. But if this works out and this product, holds up, it might end up being our new steel vendor, because the old vendor that I used for almost 95% of the steel we had on the range was coming from a company in Florida, and it appears that they've gone out of business. The Florida company, it was called Superior Ideas Targets, SI Targets, and it was a husband and wife down there in Florida. And I was kind of checking them out for some stuff. It was about a year or so ago, and I was sad to see they went out. So exciting, interesting. Might get some new steel, and we'll update it on the website, because we're getting back to shooting and not just range construction. I guess I'll address this just obliquely, because I don't want to beat a dead horse. I mean, the shooting at the Catholic school in, I think it's Wisconsin, we're not the source to give you all the information on that. Uh, I've intentionally stayed quiet about it, because it's one of those things where, again, I don't want to be like Rosie O'Donnell or some of like CNN that's come out and they make these assumptions about this person or what this person's background was, and it turns out it's wrong, because we just don't know. Um, but what has come out is, once again, we have, I as a Catholic, we have identified, we now have another trans person who apparently, according to his writings, is like, feels duped or manipulated into, quote, being trans, and didn't want to be trans anymore. And that just tells me this is a person that's probably just was disturbed, and probably disturbed for a long time, who has decided that, he's going to attack a soft target, which he apparently also put in his writings. He preferred gun-free zones because he can do whatever. And the media was all hot to trot on his motives, and like whatever they wanted him to be. And then they started realizing, he has threats against Donald Trump he's made that were on his weapons. I guess this is a thing now. These dudes write this shit on their weapons. Admiration for a bunch of these different, these killers, is trans, and then came out and, or had something where they feel like they didn't want to be trans anymore, and they were manipulated, which kind of reminds me of that Kristen Beck Navy SEAL thing that happened. And I'm going somewhere with this. The media was all interested in this person, and then the trans thing happened, and they're like, oh, let's find out if this person was bullied or whatever. What did the rest of us do to this person? And it probably looks like that nobody did anything to this person. This person is mentally ill, and we don't put mentally ill people under community control. We don't put mentally ill people in institutions. We let them walk around amongst us until they commit a felony or catch they catch a charge and end up in jail, because we're using our prisons as a mental health warehousing. And once that kind of came out, and especially the anti-trans stuff this trans person was doing, I bet the media drops this like a you probably can't find this story with a search warrant. And but the thing is, there's a lot of people that are really interested in this story. And there's some of the people talking about the SSRIs and the dope that they put a lot of these people on, like just for mental illness. But one of the things that you could tell, because the media came out with it once they had exhausted all the this person's a victim stuff, and they started realizing this person, you start looking at some of these trans communities that are online, and they're talking about, they're extremely violent. And this isn't new. This has been going on. This is new relative to me. Like, I knew a fair amount of trans people in the 90s and the 2000s into the mid 2000s, and I never saw any of this shit. You might see work at a door. You might see a couple trans people get into a slap fest, trying to let them into a bar or something. But like, you never saw like trans people like trying to murder each other. and now you're seeing this stuff online, and it's this whole big thing. And the first that I was exposed to this really violent trans ideology was listening to, of all people, Joe Rogan. And I think it's worth probably digging out. So there's a, and I was so shocked when I heard this. And this was some years ago. Joe Rogan had a woman on. She's a doctor. I think if I recall, she might have been like Hispanic, or I'm sorry, she may have been of Asian descent. So like if you're scrolling trying to find the video or the interview that he did with her, if you see an Asian woman, um, it might help you, like because there's, I don't know how many thousands of videos he's got. But the woman's name was Dr. I believe it was Deborah So. I know her last name was So. And if I recall, it was SOH. And she's apparently some kind of clinical psychologist, psychiatrist, sex researcher. And she started telling Joe Rogan about her research into a lot of the trans stuff and how they came after her, and it was violent and death threats and trying to get her fired, and just some of these things. And I thought that was interesting because there's a cohort of people in this community that are extremely violent. They're more violent than ISIS. They're more violent than Al Qaeda. And if you're listening to this and this is hitting you like Marky, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, I was with you because I knew trans people. Like, I knew quite a few of them, and we never saw this kind of stuff. But you see some of these trans people now that they if you, all you have to do is search like trans violence on Reddit or something, and the stuff you will see these people are advocating for and talking about, it's unreal. If it was, I mean, if this, I mean, this makes these people make Timothy McVeigh kind of look like a poser. I mean, I'm telling you, it's shocking. But it was interesting going back to Deborah So to listen to her and her research, because she was finding correlations to certain things in her research regarding trans ideology and trans feelings. Or I'm putting words into her mouth, but kind of like how things kind of work or how they get to where they get. And she didn't have all the answers, but it was just kind of trying to follow the data. And, she starts publishing, and they went after her. Like, I think she might have even had to go into hiding because they wanted to kill her. And one of the things that was coming up was there was a direct correlation between a certain segment, at least, of trans people and autism. So much so that if these violent trans people that are in some of these online groups, they specifically try to target autistic people or people that they feel are autistic to try to get them into their movement. And if you think about what I just said, that is no longer in a live and let people figure things out. That's kind of pushing people. That's not a doctor pushing an agenda on a patient, like possibly happened to that Chris Beck Navy SEAL person who you can't find with a search warrant now either. Now that person has transitioned back from being trans and says they were misdiagnosed. The media was all interested in that Navy SEAL that had gone trans. But now that person has switched back, again, search warrant can't find. And, but it's just interesting to see what some of the research is showing and some of the stuff. And, I also can't help but feel that some of this stuff is, you see this in mentally ill, again, I'm not a doctor, but I have this observation. Mentally ill people tend to be, and I don't know what kind of mental illness it is, but once I say it, you're gonna see it. There's a certain category or classification or segment of mentally ill people that are attracted to big ideas or popular ideas, or I'm not going to say glorified, but like top of the headline ideas. So, in the, you would see like trans people, like after 9/11 and Al Qaeda, or not trans people, you would see mentally ill people. My apologies. You would see mentally ill people that would suddenly want to wear a burqa or want to wear a whatever and start yelling Allah Akbar because they're attracted, because that's what everyone's talking about. That's what the media is talking about. Everyone's freaked out. What's going on? Who's the enemy? Where's the enemy? Are we under attack? Is there all this stuff? And you saw a lot of mentally ill people gravitate towards this Islamist whatever thing. And now, you'll see mentally ill people gravitate towards, like, now it's a lot of this trans stuff because it's so pervasive in society, at least in certain segments of society. And again, I think people like Dr. Deborah So are doing great work, but if they're trying to kill her, that's not only is that bad, that's intellectually dishonest. So you're not trying to understand, you're not trying to treat, you're not trying to support. You're basically putting yourself on a position of, I'm on this side of the argument. Anything you say on the other side of the argument is 100% wrong, and we don't want to hear it. And it's like, okay, I don't know. I mean, I'm somebody in the gun space, and I have to hear the other side of the argument all the time. Nobody says, look, I can make an argument shall not be infringed. But if somebody makes an argument shall not be infringed with the Second Amendment, nobody says that I'm allowed to go, oh, Allah Akbar or Catholic school shooter on somebody, because nobody on my side of the argument would advocate for that. Like, I'm using an extreme example to prove a point, but there's something going on here with trans violence, because even the media, right after the shooting, and they'd run down where they were like, we can't make this person a victim. We can't blame other people for this person's behavior. So the headline, one of these headline was basically something school shooting, and we need to make sure that we don't have transphobia or trans backlash or whatever. Just like after 9/11, these people, they do all this crazy shit. They kill thousands of people. And the first thing that a certain group and a certain segment in the political spectrum are concerned about, like, yo, we can't have a real conversation about what's going on with radical Islam. So, because that's racist. And it's like, we can't really talk about what's going on here. Like, these people flew airplanes into buildings and are cutting people's heads off and they're blowing themselves up. But we can't have an honest conversation about the ideology of this stuff. Just like we can't have an honest conversation about the ideology of this trans thing. And the school shooters, the amount of trans people that are shooting up stuff in schools and incidents and nightclubs and just these super violent attacks is new. This is really new. I mean, I'm a person who, I'm 53, and I've been around the world. I've been around the world twice, and I met everybody once. And this isn't something that people were generally dealing with as a ideology 30 years ago. But the media won't talk about it because it's on the left side of the spectrum as opposed to the right side of the spectrum. If there was a movement on the right side of the political spectrum that every so often, once every so many months, there was some mass casualty attack in service of this movement that was something new, like, I don't know. Let's just call it the purple balloon right-wing movement. And if all of a sudden, there was a purple balloon attack, at some nightclub, and then there was a purple balloon attack at some, whatever, at the school, and then the school in Tennessee, and all this stuff, and you start looking at these things, the media would immediately start connecting the dots. They would at least start asking questions. Nobody wants to ask any questions about any of this. And that doesn't serve anybody. That doesn't serve the people that I used to know that were trans. That doesn't serve the people today that are trans. It doesn't serve society, and it doesn't serve understanding. And then the final thing, I think I said the final thing, but this is really the final thing. I'm not going to stake a position on whether being trans is a mental disorder or not, because I don't think I'm qualified to do that quite yet. I mean, again, I'm not, and anything I say would be ridiculous. But it's obvious that it'll come out, and there's more coming out, that this person that shot up the school was mentally ill. A school teacher of his had come out and said when he was in grade school that he showed signs of self-mutilation and all this, and they tried to divert him into something, and then the mom pulled him out, and they were gone, and they're in another school, and the teacher's like, well, he's out of, there's jurisdiction's gone. And it used to be in the old days, we would identify people, minors in the school systems, who were seriously troubled, and we could divert them for extra help. And since they were minors and they were wards of their parents, you didn't legally have to mentally adjudicate them in a court of law, because their guardians could make these decisions. But nobody wants to take any responsibility. And so I'm starting to zero in on this person's mother. I've noticed the reporting about this person's mother has been very specious, and her behavior. And again, if heaven forbid, I had some kind of relative or associate or I don't have children, but when I did something, I mean, as an attorney, as someone who was advising, me, it'd be like, get an attorney, shut the fuck up. Like, don't. So I can't hold that against her, but it's going to start coming out that there's going to be repercussions. We're going to get to the point that they're really going to have to start jamming up these parents, on some of this stuff. And again, this person was an adult, so there's no longer responsible. But we'll see what comes out about this person. Again, I've dealt professionally with seriously mentally ill people, and one thing that I've learned: the true mentally ill person that starts doing crazy shit, when you interface them, even if you've got, I mean, trust me, you've got law enforcement, the FBI, all these people involved. I've been through this, seen enough of this personally, that it's never the first rodeo. It's never the first rodeo. This person that shows up at a school, and I'm not trying to laugh. I mean, again, I'm Catholic, but this person that shows up at a school, there's no way that this was like little Johnny was perfectly fine, and just all of a sudden, they just went postal, which is interesting because we had this spree in the 80s of postal workers going crazy and shooting up post offices. But we have the same spree of trans people doing stuff, but nobody says, oh, look, we have a trans pop, or, a trans attack, or someone's going trans. Again, the media ignoring this in broad strokes, so we can't really start identifying some of the facts itself is the story. Okay, let's get off that crap and talk about some more lighthearted subjects. So I have this rule, and I've said it multiple times, and I'm going to reiterate it here. And my rule is everybody gets a turn. And you'll even see it kind of like working through when I talk about like the previous subject. But my thing is everybody gets a turn. And, the thing is, you go through a story or an event where somebody's a hero, somebody's a villain. And eventually you're in it long enough, the hero becomes the villain and the villain becomes the hero. Or there'll be flashes of it or moments of, aha, see, Batman did this. He's not the good guy. He's the bad guy. And depending on where your biases are, or whatever side of the subject, people will hang on to that. What am I talking about? I'm talking about the Sig Sauer P320 M18. And you're like, what? The U.S. Air Force Global Strike Command has, as many of you have heard, they have taken and put the M18 back in service. I think there was a report that they had They had identified a certain number of guns that weren't in spec. What that spec supposedly is isn't clear to me. If that even, was related to an uncommanded discharge issue. Also, it has come out that what do they call themselves in the Air Force? It's not Naval Criminal Justice or CID. What's is it Naval Criminal Justice? Is that what it is? I guess, or yeah, because yeah. So, but what's Air Force? I can't remember. So I've had like no contact with the Air Force. They have apparently arrested an airman for not telling the truth. And so now everyone's running with the story that this person was arrested and they're going to be charged with murder or some kind of being responsible. They're going to make this person responsible for the death of the other airman and not necessarily hanging on the pistol. That may be true, but depending on your biases and where you're coming from, if you're the president of Sig Sauer, do you come out and say we're vindicated, or do you, if you're someone sitting around who has to carry a P320 because somebody has issued it to you to get your paycheck, are you still nervous about carrying your gun because what does somebody doing something wrong or possibly committing a crime or lying under oath or impeding an investigation have to do with holster pops that you're seeing around the country? I don't know. Maybe it will, maybe it won't have something to do with it. Maybe it'll be an issue with the defense. If I was a criminal defense attorney representing the airman that was charged, the first thing I'd be like, I don't have to know any of the facts. I don't have to know any of the facts. All I would be like is the first thing I would say, the argument I'd start looking into would be everyone says this gun's got a problem. This gun has a problem. You guys haven't done anything about the problem. I'm going to try to find other examples of this gun having problems in military service, and they haven't done anything about it. And now that this gun has had a problem, instead of admitting there's a problem, you want to hang it on my client, the airman, and basically put him out to dry instead of admitting there's a problem. Because you're basically, my defense is going to be for my client that this gun went off and maybe he was scared, but the gun went off not because he set it off. And again, this is just like what I warned you at the beginning of this segment. Everybody gets a turn. And so, the M18 got hammered. And then it's like, everyone's like, oh, now we know the rest of the story. Everybody gets a turn, but this pendulum swings. You never know what's going to show up at the court case. And, it may end up being that they're arguing that the gun did go off and they're charging him because he freaked out and didn't do something right or said something different happened or, then so are we back to the M18 being a piece of shit now because everybody gets a turn to get bent over? Everybody gets a turn being hero and everybody gets a turn being the villain? Just be careful, okay? There's a standard in law that everybody seems to know beyond, beyond a reasonable doubt standard, which is the criminal standard. That's, what everybody kind of knows. But remember O.J. Simpson, he was convicted in civil court for the murders of Ron Goldman and Anna Nicole Simpson. Is it Anna Nicole? Anna Nicole. Is that right? I feel like Anna Nicole. I feel like I'm getting my blonde Hollywood people confused. It's not Anna Nicole Simpson versus Anna Nicole Smith. I could be wrong. Whatever. The beyond a reasonable doubt or a quote preponderance of the evidence. I'm sitting here looking at the P320, looking at the M17 as a preponderance of the evidence. I don't care what the hell's going up there, Grand Forks, North Dakota, or Minot, or F.E. Warren, or wherever this shit happened. It's like, if I have any say on it, I would not put that gun on the hip of anybody that belongs to me or mine. And I know many of you feel the same. And that's not a judgment. That's not trying to piss on the SIG people or start a fight in a gun forum. It's just common sense. I don't know what's going on. Let's see what happens. More facts are coming out. Facts will definitely come out at the trial if there's a trial, and be prepared. Everybody gets a turn, and everybody gets a turn never stops. It never stops. So you folks that are sitting, that you're sitting pretty because you're like, oh, they charged an airman. This isn't the gun's fault. Don't hang your hat on that one. You may be disappointed. This is another story that came out that I don't know how I feel about it, but as a business person, but it kind of makes sense in a way. Because I'm like, I've been up dealing with, mail servers for newsletters and websites. And we also I've been fighting before that this year. I've been fighting with the online store. And this is the first time I've said it publicly, online store in a long time, because we've had issues with all the moves and stuff in the construction. I wasn't prepared to fill orders, and we've kind of got a system running. And the CMP program, Civilian Marksmanship Program, I used to know as the DCM, they have come out and they have said that they're going to move all of their auctions or online auctions. And I don't know if it was all the online buying, but it was portrayed as online auctions to Gunbroker. And you can definitely see that there's some changes over at CMP. They're starting to run out of stuff. Which funds their mission, because they're no longer a government entity. They're this, NGO, really, I guess. I mean, they're an NGO. I think that's actually the proper way to put it. They're a non-governmental organization. They were spun off. Thank you, Howard Metzenbaum. They were spun off, and they need to try to survive. And so they're doing things like trying to have new receiver M1 Grands made. They're contracting with TSUS to have CMP 1911s made so people can still get CMP 1911s to shoot at Camp Perry or Camp Atterbury or Talladega or these various places. And one thing they've done is they're moving to Gunbroker for their auctions. Now, I didn't know if that was just auctions or if that was all online sales, because I do know this because I have some experience with this. Maintaining an online store and having to deal with compliance and taxes, and not just paying your taxes, but collecting things like sales taxes, and keeping everything up to date and running and shipping, and having your software update with various shipping to track how much it will cost to ship this item. There's an argument to be made as a business person to just farm that out to an outside vendor. And you got a company like Gunbroker sitting there that is ready to go, and they do this every day, and they do it so much they can negotiate bulk pricing and shipping rates, and they can handle a lot of the compliance. They can handle a lot of the possibly credit card processing and all that kind of stuff. Like, I don't know to the extent that this is going, but I mean, they're going to run it. I can't imagine that a CMP is running auctions on Gunbroker that you're not going to be paying for this stuff running through a store and credit cards through Gunbroker. Then they kick the money over to CMP, obviously minus, some fees and percentage and shipping and handling and, a little tithe to Uncle Sugar or whatever. So it's interesting to see. In many ways, it'll make CMP easier to get guns from, and it'll also make CMP, it'll probably start even drying up a lot of the last of their inventory, because so many people use Gunbroker that you're going to start to see more stuff come. It's so seamless because there's so many people that are listening to this that they know how CMP works. You got to send the paperwork and send a copy of this, and you got to, are you engaged in kind of any activity, to further the furtherance of firearms training, because that's part of their charter. So, they just don't want to sell you a gun. You have to be engaged in some kind of thing. So it was like, well, you have to, they used to be, had to be a member of a gun club that had matches or the leg matches or Camp Perry matches. And then they switched it to, well, if you have a gun permit for your state, they're going to now allow that as qualifying as engaging in gun activity or, gun training from the furtherance of the CMP's mission of keeping the civilian populace, trained in the event of war. That's where that comes from. And you can just see it's moving and moving and moving and moving. And pretty soon CMP is going to be pretty much all TSIS all the time. It's going to be TSIS handguns and new repop M1 Garands. So I thought that was interesting, probably inevitable. And if you are in the market for a true World War II or Korean War M1 Garand, you probably should think about getting it fairly soon with, next, I'd say 36, 48 months, because once that stuff dries up, it's all going to get sky high, and it's already getting up there. Something else on industry news that caught my attention, and it's not something that would normally, be something that I really care about, but LMT, Lewis Machine and Tool, I think are they in Nebraska? Are they out there by Kraken? Or are they in Oklahoma? I can't, but they're west of me. I'm in Ohio. So they were awarded a $93 million contract and it's a large frame AR-10 gun. That's what I'll call it. They didn't call it that, but it's for the caliber. It's obvious. It's for 6.5 Creedmoor, and I guess LMT got a contract. I can't remember. Someone got a contract for a rifle, and someone got a contract for a carbine, and it's for SOCOM, and it's in 6.5 Creedmoor. And what I thought was interesting about this, I mean, maybe everyone listening to this is going to start throwing tomatoes at me, but it's like really time to start admitting that 6.5 Creedmoor is a military round at this point. I mean, we haven't really gone to war with one officially, but everybody sings the praises of the 6.5, and it carries pretty far. It does great in the wind. So the train up on shooting at longer ranges for designated marksman rifles or whatever they're doing with these things. You can make an argument that if you need to reach out, to hit longer ranges, you don't need 277 Fury. There's 6.5 Creedmoor. I'm not a big fan of the AR-10. I feel like the AR-10 is not a gun that's ever been that reliable for just a myriad of reasons. The 308 and AR-10 has just always been so high pressure that I just always felt like it was on the edge of just not running. And then you stick suppressors on them and do all this, it gets worse. I don't know if the 6.5 Creedmoor guns are like that, but I would think that if they keep buying these guns and these calibers, that maybe they've got it figured out. Then it might be something to consider. Maybe we should consider. I don't think we even have a 6.5 Creedmoor gun in the reference collection. I know we don't. We've never bought a 6.5 Creedmoor. I don't have 6.5 Creedmoor anything. I have 6.5 Swede, but I don't have 6.5 Creedmoor. And so it's probably coming, but it'll be interesting too to see if 6.5 Creedmoor, if there's enough government agencies buying it, that they're producing it like does Lake City make a 6.5? We start seeing bulk surplus 6.5. Does 6.5 have an NSN number? I don't know. I mean, I bet a lot of you guys do know. It's not something I've paid attention to, but it's like, maybe I should start paying attention to it. And, if it's something that interests you, maybe it's worth something you should pay attention to as well. Okay, let's go into some of the stuff, my around the world stories. And while this isn't a subject we would normally cover, when it came out, I thought it was worth definitely mentioning. So there was an incident of an F-35. I think it was in Alaska. There was an F-35 that had crashed. You could see it. I think it was an F-35. It's the F-35 Alaska crash. Let me open this up here. And this happened. It looked like it was in like a complete stall. Like you saw this thing, you're like, is that a Marine Corps F-35, an F-35B? But it's an Air Force base, and it's like, I think it's in Alaska. It's like, I don't think so. And this thing was just kind of like wafting straight down, like flat. It looked weird. And so, it's like, another F-35 crash. Well, there's been some reporting and some investigation, just like with the M18, and the U.S. Air Force F-35 crash in January 28th of this year has been traced to the WOW sensors, WOW. And you're like, what's the WOW sensor? The weight on wheels sensor, indicating that the aircraft was on the ground when it was actually in the air. So the WOW system are designed to indicate whether the weight of the aircraft is resting on its wheels, therefore detecting when the aircraft has to become airborne. It will then trigger various systems to operate appropriately based on whether the aircraft is on the ground or in flight. Due to the faulty reading, the F-35 Lightning II transitioned to on-the-ground flight control despite being airborne and became uncontrollable. The pilot successfully ejected, suffering minor injuries related to the ejection. I think he broke his back, actually. Like, I don't think that's a minor injury, but whatever. The aircraft was destroyed on impact with a total loss of $196 million. The WOW sensor misreading has been attributed to hydraulic fluid contaminated by water that led to the crash of the U.S. Air Force Lightning II. So, it's like, it was interesting. So it's like there's a sensor for the wheels, like how much weight's on a suspension. I don't know why you would want to do that on F-35. I mean, I'm not a pilot. I have taken some classes. And these airplanes are so complicated, but the thing is too, you have to remember, because again, I'm old, I remember this kind of stuff. We suffered these kinds of issues, the F-117, because it basically was so unstable, it wasn't going to fly right. And you have to remember the F-16, when it was designed, the F-16 won't fly. The F-16 is this fly-by-wire aircraft. And everybody loves the F-16, how agile it is and all this. But the only reason the F-16 stays in the air is my understanding. I'm not an engineer at this kind of stuff. My understanding was the F-16 stays in flight is because at all times, even though the pilot is making large, gross movements to steer the aircraft, the computers are making small micro movements to all the control surfaces to keep the aircraft stable. Well, what I just described with the F-16, how is that different than the F-35? I mean, I don't know what the hell that has to do with the wheels, especially if it's not a vertical takeoff and landing aircraft. But I just thought it was an interesting story and worth mentioning, where, these systems are so complicated that you kind of got to work out, some of the bugs and the environments and, all this. And, one of my favorite lines from Deal of the Century with the arms dealers, haven't you assholes ever heard of rain? And apparently have you assholes ever heard of rain has finally caught up with the F-35 up there in Alaska. Thought it was worth sharing. Okay, I thought this was worth sharing because for me right now, it's kind of it's very topical. So I posted some information about this on our social media, I don't know, month, 6 weeks ago. I'm not really sure. It's just, been crazy busy. But I have been looking at adding a vehicle to my fleet. I typically have 3, sometimes 4 vehicles, and just for various reasons, I always did. And I'm down to 2 right now. I've got my Tundra, which is now almost at 256,000 miles. I've had it it's a 2013, so I guess I've had it for 11 years, 10 years, 11 years, got it new. And then I've got the Porsche, which I put 30-some thousand miles on, so it's got 40,000 miles on it. Well, the Tundra is pretty torn up because I use it as a range truck and do all this stuff with it. And, it's got bent bumper and bashed in door. And, I've had to replace the windshield. There's scratches all over it and all this, and, all this kind of stuff. And, it is what it is. But it's, but I take care of it, which going to seem oxymoronic, but I mean, I take it to a high-end dealer and it gets, not only does it get oil change, it gets whatever the manufacturer says on schedule it gets. I tell this dealer, if you can find it, fix it. I don't care if it's giving me trouble. If they're like, oh, time for a new water pump, I'm like, boom, take it out. Time for this, take it out. And so I take care of the vehicle, and the vehicle, I like to think it'd go 1,000,000 miles. But, there's an argument to be made that I have a use for, a vehicle that I could put people in and go to nicer places. And, I can't take a bunch of people. Again, like, for example, I couldn't have a bunch of shooters at the John 911 range. I mean, I guess I could do it in a truck. But, like, let's say it's like a professional event and, I wanted to throw some people into the truck and go valet at like a really nice restaurant. And, it's like, well, the truck is, I like my truck. It's my daily driver, but it doesn't quite have the right image. And I hate to say that on a podcast, but it doesn't. So there's an argument to be made that I could probably use a four-wheel or a four-seat, a newer four-seat vehicle. And it's like, well, if I'm looking at a four-seat vehicle, and I'm doing some driving more to Washington, and doing some other stuff. And so picking people up there. So that's kind of what's going on with all this. Um, my Tundra, when I show up places, most people think I'm the gardener or I'm a contractor. Like it's great, but sometimes when you're trying to have a different image, the Tundra could cause a problem. So it's like, well, four-wheel vehicle or a four-seat vehicle. I'm not going to get like a sedan. I mean, I guess I'll get an SUV or some kind of, whatever vehicle. It's like, well, if I'm going to get an SUV or get whatever, it's like I might as well get a vehicle that can do other things. And so I've kind of zeroed in on the Ineos Grenadier. I've been kind of circling them a little bit, I like the idea that I could use it at the range. The Ineos Grenadier is this. If you're not familiar with the Ineos Grenadier, it's this SUV that's actually built in France, designed by Austrians who designed the G-Wagon and owned by a British billionaire. And he bought a Mercedes-Benz factory because Range Rover shut down his favorite Safari. I think it's called a Defender, the Range Rover Defender. I have a hard time keeping all that straight. And so he's like, like, we don't need mall crawlers. We need more vehicles for the outback, for the bush, because he's this big adventurer. And they were like, pound sand, brother, we're not going to sell you the line because we're going to make mall crawlers. And so he goes, F you, I'm going to go make my own SUV. And that's what this thing is. So for you off-road dorks, you can get them, obviously 4 seats. They look kind of like a Defender, like from the 70s. They're kind of interesting looking. They're boxy and kind of biggish with, they ride high. They got triple lockers on them, center locker, front lock, rear lock differentials. So you can do whatever. They come with some large-ish tires. But the best way I can describe these vehicles, it took me a while to kind of figure it out. The best way to look at this is it's a Jeep Wrangler, but it's a luxury Jeep Wrangler. You'd be like, what the hell does that mean? Well, these Ineos Grenadier vehicles are designed to, be used all around the world and, these backwoods places and all of that. And the insides of the vehicle, there's drain plugs. It's meant to be hosed out. You can wash it out and you can drain it out. Apparently, all the electronics in the vehicle have some kind of rating, the control stack and all that inside the cabin have a rating that they're resistant to, like, power washing or some kind of putting water. If you get water on them to clean out the vehicle, it won't just destroy them. There's a lot of tactile buttons in these things. So anyway, it's like kind of interesting because it has a look that would look decent, pulling up at, a nice place or a nice hotel or whatever. Or if I need to have a certain, image or I have to entertain people, and it would work. But also, if I want to load shooters up and it's the winter and take them back to the 600-yard line with big old tires on it, run it back there, and we got heat and whatever, and I could use it off-road. And then what's interesting is if I get it, what do you guys call this? This XPEL or PPF or wrapped, or I don't know. They put plastic on it, but best, I guess it protects it and you can just hose it off and it makes it look good. It's like, maybe I'm learning from all the mistakes that I made with my Tundra, because my Tundra is 4-wheel drive, and I've kind of realized it is, but you Jeep guys are like, no, it's not. I've kind of figured out there's definitely some limitations there. So maybe I can correct that with an Ineos Grenadier. And you're like, what the hell? So I'm negotiating, we're talking, don't know what I'm going to do. But what the hell does that have to do with the price of tea in China? Here's an article that came out about 2 weeks ago. And I was like, this is interesting. Man in Florida swaps his Ferrari F40 for an Ineos Grenadier and $2.4 million. So if you're not familiar with the Ferrari line, the Ferrari F40 is probably considered, I think it came out in the 80s. The Ferrari F40 is probably considered one of the first true supercars. They're worth millions. They're worth well over $2 million because this guy, he showed up at an Ineos Grenadier dealer for one of these trucks that I've been describing to you, and he traded in an F40. Well, basically because he wanted to leave with a Grenadier, and the dealer wrote him a big check for the F40. So he left with a Grenadier and $2.4 million. And I thought it was, it was interesting. So we have a guy who is, the Ferraris are so valuable, the F40s. Most people don't drive them. If something happens, you wreck them, they hurt the value. And, some people claim that these F40s are hard to drive because they're, I think it's the last car that possibly Enzo Ferrari was involved in designing. That might be one of the claims to fame. Again, I'm not a Ferrari guy because, Ferrari guys they're proud of cars with no miles on them, and I drive the shit out of my cars. So, I just don't know. But the story is, the deal went down in Florida at a Florida Ineos dealership. A spokesperson from Ineos Automotive confirmed to Road and Track that the owner of the F40 walked into the dealership and requested that he trade his supercar on an SUV. The salesperson, quite possibly assuming it to be something from the automotive equivalent of Impractical Jokers, in turn spoke to the dealer principal. George Radcliffe, president of the American Ineos Automotive, told Newsweek that the dealer principal said to the salesperson, "You've got to get it and you've got to get out of it." So he wrote a check for $2.4 million. The next day, the dealer reportedly sold the car for $2.5 million. Ineos confirmed the timeline to Road and Track, but I want to describe the difference. Sadly, we don't have much information at this time regarding what prompted the man to make the unusual trade, other than that the Newsweek story says he was using it, quote, on his farm, unquote. Was he strapped for cash? Was the raw analog F40 too much to handle? We don't know, but we do know that he traded one in of the most revered cars in history for a boxy SUV inspired by the original Land Rover Defender. So I can tell you from the prices here, a fully tricked out Grenadier, like with the options you're going to really want if you're going to really use it, you're going to be at $100,000. Yes, I'm fully aware that there's 70 and 80 and you can buy a used one, but the reality is you're at 100. You're in the 90s, you're at 100. I've got a quote from one right now on a piece of paper 5 feet from where I'm sitting for 123 that we're talking about. And because it's got some crap on it I don't want. So obviously the dealer, what they did is they took the F40 minus $100,000, gave him his truck, and literally flipped it. So like, it's not like the dealer, like anybody got ripped off or anybody got taken advantage of. That's what the guy was saying in the article. You got to get in it and you got to get out of it, because they're in the business of selling these SUVs, not the Ferrari business. Unless you want Sir Jim Ratcliffe, who owns Ineos Grenadiers, the billionaire in England, like he decides, hey, bring that F40 to my house. Like that could have possibly happened, but it's entirely possible that the old owner of Grenadier Ineos already had an F40. That's kind of what we're talking about. So there'll be a story on the website showing, pictures of what we're discussing. And as a matter of fact, if you're looking at the pictures in the article, there is a light tan looking Grenadier that they show in a picture. I'm currently debating getting a white one or possibly a black one. I didn't think I wanted a black one because I've got a black truck, but if I put this cover on it and do whatever, and they've kind of got one ready, it's like, I don't know, I could be open to black, but we'll see. So if you guys are interested in this kind of stuff, go to the website. I'll have a story on it. If you don't care, I understand. We're not going to turn into the SUV Ferrari truck website. So there it is. Okay, we're going a little long here for a solo episode, so I'm going to go ahead and start, reducing altitude, rolling back the engines, and we're going to get ready to land this aircraft at the Atlanta International Airport. So the couple things I just thought it was worth mentioning. Australia has now implemented, they went after the guns and did all that and all the crime and all the issues. Now Australia is instituting a machete ban. They have a turn-in program for machetes. you have to have a license to have a machete. You can't carry a machete. I think you have to have a license to own a machete. And it's like, I mean, we have some listeners in some of these countries, and I know some of you guys in Australia feel like your gun laws aren't that bad. You're like, no, we have guns. Compared to where we are in America, no, you don't. It's ridiculous, and that's because you're banning machetes now. And yeah, you could point towards the you could point towards the shooting at the Catholic school that I mentioned at the top of the hour. There's a fancy phrase, at the top of the hour. But the reality is that's not a gun problem. That's a mental health problem. We don't put mentally ill people in community control anymore, and we haven't since the 70s because a lot of that was abused, and we screwed up all that. We screwed up. We don't have orphanages either. Generally, we have foster care where the kids can just be abused in private. So yeah, like there's big problems there. This is not a gun problem. This is a large society problem. And if you guys would allow people to more freely protect themselves, machetes wouldn't be a problem because God created man and Sam Colt made the machete useless. So there's that. Wanted to put that out there. On the best headline front, because this is my favorite new category on the podcast, is like the best headline, because it gives me the chance as the podcast creator to look, to add some content to the podcast that I personally find interesting. I get a chuckle out of it. Like, I'm not really interested in the story that much because it doesn't generally fall under the rubric of John 19:11 or guns or industry or whatever. But the headline itself is so hilarious that it makes the website. So this is a real headline, and I'll have a link to it. I'll have a link to it on the website, and it says, and it turns out the headline, not only is the headline real, it's actually correct. So listen to this. Lesbians responsible for 100% of space crime. Let me read that again. Lesbians responsible for 100% of space crime. And you're like, what the hell is he talking about? And so apparently this happened a little while ago, but there was this lesbian astronaut that worked for NASA. And I don't know if I'm going to say this in a way just to make me laugh. I don't know if she was lesbian married or just lesbian dating, but she's a lesbian. And she's at the International Space Station, or she's in orbit somewhere. And I guess she was having a lesbian fight with her lesbian girlfriend, and they were having lesbian problems. Am I using the word lesbian too much? And apparently from orbit and whatever craft she was in, she apparently broke into, I don't know if it was the banking records or emails or both of her estranged or whatever lesbian relationship person, and did this. It was against the law, and they caught it. And I don't know how they're going to if they prosecute. This was not that recent, but it was a headline that was generated recently. It's like, has there ever been a crime in space, like a murder or a theft, or has something ever gone missing? It's like, well, there was a kind of a domestic violence stalking that took place in space and committed by a lesbian. So the first documented case of a crime in space goes down in history, apparently, unless you can give me further information, to a lesbian astronaut that worked for NASA. So now let's go to the police blotter. We'll go ahead and we'll wrap this one up. This is, I'm only going to give you two today because I thought they were worth mentioning. One is a gun industry thing, and one is just kind of like how to do it right. The first thing comes out of Texas. There was a straw buyer down in Texas who was apparently buying semi-automatic belt-fed guns for the cartels, and he's been given jail time for buying guns and shipping them across the border, right? He's legal. I think they were paying him $1,000 a gun, if I can recall. I'll have the article on the website, but it was interesting because one of the guns he was charged with buying, if not multiple versions, was the FN 249S. And the FN 249S is the FN SAW, but there is a civilian version that is made the semi-automatic. They had to make some changes to the bolt because it doesn't fire from an open bolt. It still fires from a closed bolt. And apparently the cartels down there in Mexico wanted these guns, or because they're belt fed and you can have have, quite a bit of firepower in them. Maybe they're converting them. I don't know, but I thought it was interesting that a criminal element in Mexico was interested in FN 249. Or hell, for all I know, he bought it because he's spending their money and then showed up across the border and they're like, fuck, we hate this thing. Like, again, I can't assume that that they actually wanted it, but it's definitely wrapped up in the program. So I thought that was worth sharing. The second thing comes out of France, and there was a video. This was earlier this summer, and I've been sitting on it because I've been busy. So if you've ever been to France, ever been to Paris, we have the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier here in the United States, and that's at Arlington, and Arlington is kind of outside of Washington, and then we have the tomb and all that. And at Arlington, do you have the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier? You've got JFK's. I think JFK is also buried out there, and then there's like the Eternal Flame that kind of it never goes out and all that. Well, in France, it's in downtown France. If I recall, it's under the Arc de Triomphe, like the main road. They have I think it's a World War I memorial. It's in the ground, and it's got an eternal flame that always goes. And I think they might have, I don't know if they've got someone guarding it, or there's got to be some kind of presence, but you literally, you see traffic driving all around us because it's basically in a traffic circle. And they put it in to remember all the people killed in France during World War I, or the soldiers, because they lost a horrendous amount of soldiers. It was unbelievable. So there's a video of a guy. He kind of walks through the crowd. It's not that busy. Walks through the crowd, walks right into the middle of the memorial, takes a cigarette, sticks it down into the eternal flame, puffs on it, and walks away and keeps on walking. It's like totally disrespectful because it's an open flame because it never goes out. And, everyone's like, what the fuck? Well, the French, they, not to be totally shit on, but and people in America don't quite understand this, but the French are real good at finding people. I'm not going to get into how I know all that, but I promise you, the French are really good at finding people if they want to. And just from the video of a cell phone video, they got this guy. This guy was I think an Algerian or Moroccan naturalized citizen in France. So he's I hate to say it, in the terms of the podcast, not to make it political or whatever, but apparently he's Arabic or Moorish, or I don't know, or whatever he is, and could be probably Muslim, but he's a naturalized French citizen because of all the connections between the French and North Africa and all that. Well, the French, they charged him, they arrested him, they charged him, and not only did they do all that, they denaturalized his ass. And I thought it was worth mentioning because, you got these stories here in the U.S. of Maryland man who's an illegal alien, possibly involved in child sex trafficking. I don't know if he even speaks English. All this back and forth and all this drama. This dude disrespected a public monument in the middle of France. He is a French citizen. They not only arrested and charged him, when they're done with him, they're going to kick him out of the country. He's no longer a French citizen. And the thing is, how can you do that? Well, you got to realize, the Due Process Bill of Rights and the Constitution, the way they currently function in the United States, we have the strongest civilian protections in the world. If you don't believe me, just look at the way the Canadian government behaved during COVID. Look at the way the English government, the British government behaved during COVID. Look at the way the French government behaved during COVID. And in a lot of these other countries, you fuck around, you're going to find the fuck out. And I thought it was worth sharing. I don't have an opinion either way. I thought it was, just disrespectful. I don't think you should, again, I'm an American. I don't take it personally that he did that, but I thought it was immensely disrespectful, and tip of the hat to the French government for basically saying, fuck you and the horse you rode in on, brother, you out of here. So, well, this wraps up episode 381 of the John 1911 podcast. You want to see more stories or pictures or links like this, please go to the website at john1911.com. That's JOHN1911.com. Remember, it's all about shooting guns and having fun and being respectful in France. Everybody, have a good day.